Today is Monday, June 16th, 2025. This is Quick Start from CBN News. I'm Dan Andros. Suspect in the Minnesota Lawmaker shooting has been apprehended after a massive manhunt. We'll have that top story and more on today's podcast, where we bring you news from a Christian perspective. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a rating. You can email us as well, quickstartpodcast@cbn.org. We would love to hear from you. We're glad you're here with us, getting through the news of the day each and every weekday, bright and early. Joining me today, CBN's Billy Hallowell, as we're looking at a ton of stuff going on today on the Focus story. Billy, you talked to Todd Hampson about all the chaos that's going on in the Middle East right now.
Yeah, he answered a lot of questions, as we'll talk about today, on just the end times and what might be currently happening and where it all fits in.
All right, looking forward to the details there coming up in a minute. Also on the main thing, Madison Seals has more on a Supreme Court ruling that ended temporary immigration protections for over 500,000 migrants. We'll have that coming up on the main thing. All right, make sure you're subscribed to all of our CBN News podcasts. You can find the link to them in the description of this podcast episode. Billy's Newsmakers, Navigating Trump 2.0. Faith and Culture, Heaven Meets Earth, a great podcast lineup. Make sure you're checking all of those out. All right, we're going to head now to the news in 90 seconds. And the largest manhunt in Minnesota history is now over. Vance Bolter, the suspect accused of killing House Speaker Melissa Hortman and her husband and shooting State Senator John Hoffman and his wife, have been captured. Welter, who's 57, was arrested in Sibley County after a two-day manhunt involving over 20 SWAT teams. Authorities say he crawled to officers and verbally identified himself before being taken into custody. Prosecutors have charged him with 4 counts of second-degree murder and attempted murder. He was dressed in police-style tactical gear, posed as an officer, and then opened fire at the Lawmaker's homes. Officers found 3 AK-47s, a handgun, a mask, ballistic vest, and a list of other public officials in his vehicles. His bail is set for $5 million. Israel now says it has aerial superiority over Tehran. The IDF claims it has degraded Iran's air defenses so significantly that Israeli fighter jets can now operate over the Iranian capital without major resistance, controlling the skies from western Iran all the way to Tehran. This comes just hours after Iran launched another wave of missiles at Israel overnight. At least 5 people were killed, dozens wounded, and air raid sirens blared across the country. One missile even struck near the U.S. consulate in Tel Aviv. American personnel were not hurt. Those are just some of today's top headlines. You can check out more stories over at cbnnews.com. And Billy, we're still waiting for all the facts to come in on this suspect who's been apprehended. Obviously, we're going to continue to cover what's happening in Israel and Iran, so make sure you're staying tuned to CBN News for all the updates on that. But this story over the weekend with this manhunt is over, but everyone's trying to figure out what the motivation was. There are a lot of details that are still coming in. So again, this is where we caution, just wait until we hear more, learn more, until making a final conclusion. You always see people taking a nugget of information and then drawing a conclusion from that, but it's always best to just wait there.
Yeah, you got to wait it out and see. And I think that's the most dangerous thing that people do in these circumstances, is making a decision about why they think something happened without any real information. And so we got to be praying about the situation, but really just being discerning and waiting to get confirmation on the actual facts, not what we think the facts are or want them to be.
Yeah, and there are a bunch of facts coming in, and so there are definitely signs that that this could have been politically motivated, but again, you just don't want to take one tidbit of information and then say, yep, that's it because of this, because anyone who's driven to this level of violence is not mentally stable in the first place. So there's going to be more reasons. There's going to be more explanations if we do get them. But again, jumping to conclusions on it based on 1 or 2 of these nuggets is just simply not advisable. But nevertheless, glad that manhunt is over, and that man can't inflict any more violence on other people at this particular time. So we're We're going to head to the focus story now. And as Billy mentioned there at the top, author and prophecy expert Todd Hampson is reacting to the current battle between Israel and Iran. So what's he saying?
Yeah, this is interesting because obviously some people, when an event like this happens, they're going to start to wonder what is going on when it comes to the end times. You know, when you have Israel and Iran going back and forth based on what we see in scripture, there are going to be questions. And so, you know, I asked Todd, and he's written numerous books on this topic. He's also the host of the Prophecy Pros podcast, so he's one of the best people to ask about this. He said he wasn't surprised that, you know, Israel's attack on Iran happened. He said he didn't know if it was going to happen today or 2 weeks from now, but he knew it was going to happen. But you know, he did say that there were elements of this that, you know, are obviously shocking, because he said Israel really went all in on this, and, you know, explained why he believes they are doing that. Also talked about how these events could have huge implications, right? He talked about Iran really making no secret of the fact that they want to wipe Israel off the map, and that this, you know, Operation Rising Lion does again seem to be an attempt for Israel to protect itself by trying to stop this nuclear program that Iran really has not ever been willing to come to the table to actually halt. And so when you have a country saying they want to wipe you off the map, at some point, especially after October 7th, you start to take those threats very, very seriously. And so that's what we're seeing happen here.
Yeah, and what does he believe drives Iran's hatred? You know, that, like you're saying, they want to wipe them off the face of the map. What does he say drives this hatred that Iran has of Israel?
Yeah, this is interesting, right? Because we've talked a lot about this. We've seen it throughout history. We see it in the Bible with, you know, Haman and Esther. We see it again and again and again. We saw it October 7th. We see it with the way Iran traditionally talks about Israel. And he said he believes that this hatred is not just this temporal political thing, that it's all spiritual. He said it's all demonically led at the root, which is really interesting when you start to break that down, especially because you have one of the biggest prophecies in Ezekiel 37 that many, many people believe was fulfilled in 1948, was the reestablishment and regathering of Israel as a country. This is a country that was gone for, you know, 2,000 years and is back on the map again. And that was something that some people had given up on. That prophecy had been so long, but here we are now. It's been decades. Israel is back on the map. And so he said he believes it's demonically led and that it's all tied together there. He said from a human perspective, it's an ideological thing. They're radical Islamic adherents. They have a clock that is counting down to the destruction of Israel. That's in their capital city. I mean, who does that? You know, so he's just saying, look, this is not normal. The quest to destroy all of the Jewish people that we keep hearing about again and again is demonic at its root.
And why is Ezekiel 38 and 39 coming up as the war continues to forge on?
Yeah, so we talked about Ezekiel 37, right? And we've got this, people can read this, it's written up, they can watch the video where he explains all this. But for those who don't know, you have the regathering of Israel prophesied in Ezekiel 37. Ezekiel 38 and 39 then talks about this battle that will happen in the last days. Now, it's an Iranian-led invasion. It mentions Persia, which is the former name of Iran. And this is the Gog and Magog prophecy. There's lots of debate and discussion about this, but people like Hampson believe that this is going to be an invasion that happens, an attempted invasion into Israel, that there'll be an alliance of countries. He said it'll be Turkey, Iran, and Russia. Now, Russia is not specifically named, but it's Gog from Magog, and Magog is believed to be, by many prophecy experts, Russia, and and Gog is the leader of Russia, it's believed to be. Now, what is interesting about this, for those who believe this is really what's happening in Ezekiel 38 to 39, Russia's been commenting a lot on this battle. They've said they're going to stand by Iran, right? They've said that they're going to, and they have a very close military alliance. They have a very close alliance in general, the two countries. And so that'll be interesting to watch. But he said, and this is important, it's unclear where this current battle fits in, right? This is Israel going after Iran. And there are lots of other elements here. But he said, look, these events, everything we've seen happen the past few decades, including this, we're not watching necessarily prophecy unfold, but the stage is being set for what we see happening in Ezekiel 38 to 39. That doesn't mean it's going to happen tomorrow. It could happen in 30 years. It could happen in 100 years. But the things that are happening politically and culturally and socially are setting the stage for what we see in Ezekiel 38 and 39.
Yeah, I mean, it's really hard not to look at these events that are happening and at least consider and think about scripture and prophecy and what is going on in that region. And we also saw President Trump say that he was considering talking to Putin when it came to mediating this whole situation. So it's just very interesting to look at everything and again, keep an open mind, because as you said, the timing of it, where does this one fall? Is this just, are we too early on this timeline? And again, as we've talked about on several of our programs, you're not going to know the exact time, but it is good for us to be thinking about scripture and thinking about Jesus' return ultimately, because that's where our eyes should be. And so if anything good comes out of discussing all this, it's that that we can be focused on the return of Christ.
Absolutely. And that's where we got to keep our eyes fixed.
All right. Absolutely. Well, appreciate you bringing that one to the podcast today, Billy. We're going to head to the main thing now. And the Department of Homeland Security acted on a Supreme Court ruling ending temporary immigration protections for over 500,000 migrants. Well, pastor and president of the National Latino Evangelical Coalition, Reverend Gabriel Salguero, joins Madison Seals to discuss the need for long-term immigration solutions and how the church can respond to this issue.
Reverend Gabriel, first, I just want to get your reaction to the ruling from the Supreme Court to end deportation protections for people facing dire humanitarian crises in their home countries. What is your reaction to this news?
Well, look, I think the Supreme Court is within its rights to make these decisions. But the truth is, as a pastor and as a Latino evangelical leader, I'm really disappointed. For quite some time, we were told that immigration priorities were going to focus on violent criminal activity. But the truth is, what we're seeing is not that. The revocation of temporary protected status, which, by the way, is a legal status, they're here legally, the attempt to go after birthright citizenship, the detaining and threats of deportation for people who are reporting to their immigration court cases shows that what we were told is not exactly what's being executed. And it's impacting our worship services, our families, particularly children who are children of mixed status families who are really concerned what they will do if their parents are deported. And so we are disappointed by these actions, although we are not surprised.
And what impact will this have on other immigrants who have been here, like you said, legally in the U.S. and have benefited from this program?
Look, I think there is a real sense of caution saying if we continue to apply for these kinds of status, legal temporary protected status or humanitarian parole, but it can be pulled from under us at any given moment, people will be less likely to apply for these programs. And many of these people worship in our churches, go to our schools, are starting small businesses. Some of them are actually pastors here in Central Florida. We've had some families impacted who are serving in ministry. And so this type of action that promises temporary status or humanitarian parole, but then switches depending on who is in the White House is really disconcerting and really affects future applications to legal immigration status.
And you started to get into this, how this ruling can affect churches. Can you talk about that a little bit more, how this ruling can affect the faith community as a whole that a lot of these migrants have been a part of?
Yeah, I think without question, when you begin to revoke temporary protected status, which I want to remind everyone again is legal, you're going to impact church attendance, you're going to impact leaders and volunteers in the church. I was invited to a convention to speak at, which was later postponed and transferred to online because of the fear that some of these people will be targeted. some of the concerns around racial profiling. You're here legally, but if you're being pulled over and being profiled, because how do they know whether someone is here undocumented or legally? So this has reverberated across our congregations for some months. The National Latino Evangelical Coalition, which I lead, and our church in particular, has raised its voice saying, we were told that the priorities will be violent criminal immigrants, which we support, that violent criminal immigrants need to be processed and deported. But the targeting of people who are here legally, the going after birthright citizenship, shows that there are other priorities at stake, and we are severely disappointed with this type of action. And furthermore, we would ask people who have publicly said that they were only going to go after violent criminals, we would ask them, what is their position now that time has shown that not to be the case?
And what are you hearing from immigration advocates about this?
Look, I think what we're doing is first informing our parishioners and our families that they need to know their rights. What are they allowed to do legally? Number two, to be respectful of law enforcement and ICE agents. They're just doing their job, and we have to treat them respectfully. But at the same time, advocates are doing what we've always done, which is saying to Congress that they need to have bipartisan immigration reform to fix some of these challenges once and for all. Executive orders, whether they're Democrats or Republicans, do not provide long-term solutions. We need Congress to act to provide long-term solutions. At the same time, as pastors, we don't ask people for their immigration status. We are called by Christ to serve men, women, and children, no matter where they were born, and we're committed to that gospel call.
And how should the church as a whole respond to this issue? How would you encourage people in the church to respond to this issue?
I think that we need a sober approach. I think there's a lot of heat and not enough light around issues of immigration. I think people need to know why some people are online for many, many years, that we have a broken immigration system, and that we should continue to advocate for Congress to provide long-term bipartisan solutions, while at the same time not ignoring our gospel call when Jesus told us in Matthew 25, I was a stranger and you welcomed me. And so we have to continue to serve the people that are in front of us and are in our communities while advocating for long-term solutions.
All right, Madison, appreciate that conversation there. And that's going to leave us with time on the podcast today for one last thing.
Psalm 122:6, pray for the peace of Jerusalem. May they be secure who love you. An important verse as this drama forges on.
Yeah, absolutely. 100%. Good spot to leave it there. Thought for us, prayer requests, and continue to pray for everyone involved there. All right. That's going to do it for this edition of the Quick Start Podcast. As always, get yourself on over to cbnnews.com and faithwire.com for more news from a Christian perspective. Lord willing, that creek don't rise on us. We'll get back to it tomorrow with more. God bless. We'll see you then.